Towards the bottom of the page. Okay. The schus of our learning, we should have the base of Migdash, and should be also for Shleima for Yom Nasim Ben Shalom. Do you see this? Tesvav Hamaranov Hamakara Sukasi B'Shpudim. If someone uses metal spits to support the schach of the sukkah, or if he uses, actually before I say to support the schach, first of all he puts these up, then we'll see that he's going to be able to put the schach on them. Or he uses a bed frame. That means that the pieces along the sukkah is actually part of his bed. If the space between the gap between the spits or between the bedposts, the bed frame, is equal to the material itself of the spits in the bed frame, the gap is the same. So then ksher, it's kosher. Why? Because the schach fills in those gaps, and he has equal kosher schach, the basal schach. Then the Mishnah says, what we quoted before, another halacha, someone hollows out a haystack, like an igloo, and he goes inside. So there's the hay that's on top of him. But that's not a kosher sukkah. We said before because of tasabale menase, because he didn't put the hay on the top for the sake of a sukkah. Gemara right away has a question. This Gemara should be a question. This Mishnah should be a question on Rav Huna Breder Rav Yeshua. The Itmar, because it was stated, a machlekes Rav Huna Breder Rav Yeshua and Rav Papa. These are students of Abaye and Rava. Later Amira says Paratz Kaimet. In Hilchas Shabbos, you're supposed to have walls, like 4 walls, to be able to carry in an area. Let's say the walls have large gaps, well, larger than 3 tvachim gaps, or maybe larger than 10 amas if it's a doorway or whatever. But if it's to the extent that there's more gap, there's equal gap. If there's 50-50, equal gap to solid. So it's a machlekes. Do we consider that a solid or not? So Rav Papa says it's mutter, it's good enough. And Rav Huna Breder Rav Yeshua says that it's not good. Same thing over here. What I really need over here is kosher schach. And it's 50-50. Puzzle to kosher. Rav Huna Breder Rav Yeshua says over there, I need the solid wall, and 50-50 is not good. Over here also by the sukkah, I need the schach, and 50-50 shouldn't be good. Amalach Rav Huna Breder Rav Yeshua would respond, Micah, my son, what did the Mishnah say that if there is the space between these rafters, these things going across your sukkah, what does it mean? The space is equal to the things themselves. That's benichnas v'yatzei. That's when you're able to put the schach in between and also to take out. So whenever you have 2 things, 2 poles, let's say, and you have to fit one in between them, so it would need to be slightly larger to get it to fit in. Otherwise, it's going to be to get it exact is going to be too tight. It needs to have a little bit more. So they said it's benichnas v'yatzei. The Gemara says, how do you know it's really benichnas v'yatzei? Maybe it was done, and the Mishnah doesn't tell me that the gap is slightly larger. You're suggesting that it is, that it was slightly larger, but perhaps but it's possible that they did it exact, and that's what the Mishnah is talking about. We didn't mean that was a possibility that it was larger. What we meant is that it was bedafka made larger. The gap was bedafka made larger, so that you should be able to fit the schach in equally, but to fit another beam in, and that would now be, instead of the beam, would now be schach. I read this according to Rashi. Rava says, I feel tema b'shein mad. Rava says, you know what? It doesn't have to be that you made it larger, the gap larger. It's not necessary. Why? Now, chassis and Erev is like a crisscross. Yeah, it could be vertical and horizontal, but that's it's over here. We're dealing with that if the beams of the sukkah spits or the bedposts that are going across the top of the sukkah like this, you put the kosher schach like that, and in order for it to be supported, it would be supported on the beams. Now, if that's the case, then there's an overlap of the schach over the beams. Now, that overlap makes the puzzle schach. That's coming up. That's not the exact picture. That overlap would make the puzzle schach kosher, because we said that puzzle schach could become batel, and because we're putting it directly on top, we're mixing the kosher schach on top of the puzzle schach, so it's mevatel. Okay, that was one pshat in this Gemara. What comes out as a carbon asano comes out from this is that according to Rava, at least, you're allowed to use a puzzle schach to support your kosher schach. Just chiddush. Yeah, the carbon asano is a commentary on the Rush. Rav Nasanel Whale, like the watch company, Raymond Whale, watch company. The Vial was there. I don't know if that. Yeah, he had a son also, Rabbi Didier Tia, had a nickname Tia, the Vial, also interesting as far as Shuvas and stuff. So he was from Prague, I think. Anyway, Taisus learns this Gemara a little different, based on a different girsa. His girsa is the girsa of Rabbeinu Hananel, which is V'ha'iyab shalatamtim. The Gemara changes a little bit the way it's questioning and answering, but the answer, according to Taisvus, when it says Amar Avami b'madeh, it's not that you made the gap a little wider in order to fit the schach in. The madif means that there's already an overlap of the schach over the sides. The madif means the schach was a little bit larger, was spreading over the side. If that's the case, then what's the chiddush of Rava? That you have to go through, because Rava is basically telling a continuation. Okay. The Mishnah then said, basically what we just did in this Gemara was we asked the question according to Rav Huna Bari Rabbi Shua, and we responded, it's not a question on him because we had extra schach. Does this mean that the halacha is like Rav Huna Bari Rabbi Shua because the Gemara made such a big deal about it? So there's a steer in the Rambam. In Hilchos Shabbos, the Rambam paskins like Rav Papa. In Hilchos Sukki, paskins like Rav Huna Bari Rabbi Shua. That's a bit of an issue. Magid Mishnah. Okay. Use bedpost. Lema Messiah Leila Rabami Bartavyumi, Rabami Bartavyumi, Sicha Babala Kalim Sulam. See what is this bedpost, this bed frame? It's a broken bed. Now we're saying that you need to have the gap in between enough that the kosher schach will overwhelm will nullify the non-kosher schach. Now, is a bed frame really not kosher? Well, yeah, a bed frame would be not kosher because that would be like a keli. But let's say a broken bed frame, it's not a keli. He says this is a support for Rabami Bartavyumi, who had an interesting halacha. He says, let's say you use worn out kalim to the extent that they're not kalim anymore. They used to be a keli, a broken broomstick, a broken table, a broken chair. Can you use those things or worn out? We'll see what he's referring to. But can you use those things that they're not kalim anymore for schachin? He said, no, psula. So Rabami Bartavyumi is an Amira, and we have a Mishnah that supports that because we said Baruch Hasamita. The Gemara says Kadam Rav Chanan Amar Rebbe, not necessarily is it a real support for this Amira, because it could be that what we're talking about is what Rav Chanan said in the name of Rebbe. Said Baruch Shtei Krayim B'Ktara Shtei Baruch Shtei Krayim B'Ktara Shtei Krayim. talking about is that the bed frame, that's what you saw in the picture, is that it's not 100% broken. There's one side that came off. Either it's the short side, so you'll have the other short side with the two long poles, or it's the long side that came off, and you have the long side of the bed with two poles missing the other side. And we'll see soon. So whatever the case is, if that's the case, then we're not dealing with baloi kalim. We're dealing with just a bed frame that one part was taken off. It's not really like totally broken. Achanami, if that's the case, Rav Chanan Barami said over there, Rav Chanan Amar Rebbe said that that's the case. Achanami Baruch Shtei Kraim, Ktsar Shtei Kraim, you could do the same thing by us. And we'll say that it's not really a broken bed frame, it's still a keli. Where was that Rav Chanan Amar Rebbe said this? It says, this that it said in a Mishnah. Mishnah is in Kalim. It says, if a bed is touched by something that's tummy, so the whole bed becomes tummy, even though the bed has different parts, but the whole bed becomes tummy, even though the tummy only touched one part of it, touched the leg. All four legs become tummy, the whole frame, everything is tummy. And what about putting it in the mikveh? So if one part of it became tummy, you don't take that part off and put it in the mikveh. You put the whole thing in the mikveh. If they get a few people, you carry it in. Rabbi Eliezer, that's what Rabbi Eliezer holds. Chacham said, a bed frame is tamei evarim, piece by piece, and it becomes tar piece by piece. You can take it apart and put it in the mikveh. My niyo, what does it mean piece by piece? Amar Rav Chanan Amar Rebbe Arucha Shtei Kraim, Ktsar Shtei Kraim. No one says that you can take it apart to the extent that it's not a keli, and then put each individual part in the mikveh. It has to go into the mikveh as you're being mitar something that's a keli. If you take it apart totally, there's not a keli, you put it in the mikveh and then you put it back together, it would still be tamei. We're talking about that you are mitar it as a keli. You take a keli and you put it. So how is it a keli if you're telling me limb by limb? It says what it means limb by limb is that it was taken apart in a way that it's still usable. How is that? Well, you have three parts to the frame, it's still usable. L'may chazia, how do you use three parts to a frame? I mean, you won't lay on that, would you? So it says, what you would do is you would support it against the wall. Aguda is a wall. You'd support it against the wall and you could sit on it. And you would put ropes over it. So in other words, there's a way of missing one side of a bed frame to still use it by pushing it against the wall. And that you'll see in the pictures. Yeah, that over there. Can I look at it?
I'm having a recollection of a previous Gemara we learned that had to do.
Yeah. It's still a keli. That's what we're saying. It's 3 years old. Yeah.
We once learned, I don't remember what it was. It was here or somewhere else about like a tent that was up on one side.
Right.
This.
Right.
We were, and that I don't
mention that
kosher or not kosher.
We mentioned that it's not kosher. I'm going to have it again. Actually, it's coming up.
Because that's what this starting sound like.
Yeah. Okay. Gufa. We learned before we go back. Gufa is we go back to examine a statement of an Amira. Amar Abami Bar Tivumi Sicha Baloi Kalim Psula. Rav Ami Bar Tivumi said that if you use Baloi Kalim, worn out clothing, utensils, it's psula. My baloi keli, it can't be used for schach, even though at this point it's not a keli anymore, but it started as a keli. What's the problem? Ask the complicated question. What's exactly the problem? Rashi said it came from a keli that was chashuv. Given the Mikelios of Gozer Burabanan. There's other commentaries here how this works. What's the issue? Maybe it's a Gezerah that you maybe get confused. If you can use Baloi Kalim, you can also use. You may end up using real Kalim. My Baloi Kalim, what are the worn out Kalim? Amar Abaya, Baya says matlani Hashem bem shalish al shalish. We're talking about matlani, so like patches, like pieces of cloth. Taloy is a patch. These are small
salesman sample.
Yeah, so like samples, right? These are small pieces of cloth, 3 by 3 at spice, 3 fingers by 3 fingers. If it's less than that, less than 3 by 3, then the poor or the rich won't use it. I'm not sure why it adds in or the rich. Should say. I don't know. Okay, because poor people would put patches on their clothing. This is so small that they won't even use it as a patch. Right. So this is not Makabal Tumah. But nevertheless, Rav Ami Bar Tavimi tells us you can't use it for schach because it used to have Tumah. Came from a cloth that was tummy, or that could have been tummy. Right, right. Yeah, that's a very good question. Why don't we say that it's not a keli? Rashi says, since it came from a keli. And originally it wasn't Kabul Tama. Tumas Mishka Vasavanida, whatever. That was yeah. Some reason there's still a problem. Some of the commentators say that it's Xera. Yeah, that's an easy answer. Yeah, because people may get confused and start using Caleb. I think the Rambam, or based on the Rambam, that's what they say. Hanukkah say the Rabami. Yeah, that's an easy answer because the hard answer is to say that how do we view you can go like this. What do I use for a schach? It needs to be the waste of the wine press and the threshing floor. So if it's anything that's makabel tama, then it's not the waste of the wine. The waste of the wine press is just the sticks and that are left over from the grapes. That's what I'm allowed to use. Or from the threshing floor would be just the stalks. So here I have kalim, I have utensils. Okay, so as a keli, it's puzzle for schach. Now it's worn down and it's not a keli anymore. But that doesn't make it into pseilus and v'yeka. It's not a keli, but it doesn't get doesn't come into the category, and that's the complicated answer. Right? The other way is it's exera. Anyway, it's a Ramban goes into that. Hanukkah Seder Rabami Bar Tavumi. There's a brisa that supports this. If you have a mat that's made out of these are types of reeds, possibly papyrus. Shirea, if the mat got worn down, now this was a mat that was probably used for sleeping on or sitting on, so that's considered a keli. Now, if it gets worn down, now it's not a shear anymore of a mat. It's so small, so you still can't use it for schach. That's a good support. See, even though it's not the shear, but Rav Ami Bar Tavimi has a support from this price. Machtela, that's because it's not a shear, you can't use it for schach. That's a support. A mat of reeds. If it's a large one, you can use it for schach. If it's a small one, you can't use it for schach. The difference between large and small is what the intention of the person that made it was. If it was a large mat, then it was probably used to put as a roof somewhere, for shade, which that's exactly what schach is. But if it's a small one, it was probably used to put on the floor, to sit on it, to sleep on, and that would be that would be considered a king. Rabbi Eliezer rather, but even if it's a large mat, still mekabel tuma, and you can't use it. So that's a machlekes over there, and we'll get to that. It's discussed later. We spoke about hollowing out a haystack, that it wasn't a kosher sukkah. Amar Rav Huna leishanu ala she'ein sham chalal tefach meshach shiva. V'yesham chalal tefach meshach shiva reis sukkah. It's two ways of learning what it means chalal tefach. Whatever the case is, let's go back to a machlekes that we had before. When you have a double-decker sukkah, you have a sukkah on top. So Rav Huna was of the opinion that how tall should the sukkah on top be to pass the one that was under it? 1 tefach. Rav Huna, Rabba bar Rav Huna and Rav Chisda held that it needed to be 4 tefachim. And Shmuel said it needed to be 10 tefachim, just like a kosher sukkah. And Rav Huna has this opinion that 1 tefach is already enough to consider something a tent. He has a support for it, which in Hilchos Tumah, that's considered a tent. And so therefore, that's going to be a sukkah as well, enough to passel a sukkah underneath. And the same thing over here. If I take a haystack and instead of putting it directly on the ground, I put it on, you know, those things that they have the forklifts, they lift up these, what's it called? The pallet that, what's the thing that they put underneath? There's like a little, that's called a pallet. It's a little wood. Let's say you put it on something like that, on those, that pallet. So you pile the haystack up on that. So there's a gap underneath it of a tefach. So he says that's already considered an ayal. So you already really have your schach there. The problem is your walls aren't tall enough. So you can still make the walls tall enough. You can make the walls tall enough. You can, and it's not considered that you're making the schach kosher. The schach was already kosher because you already had a tefach. So
how do you get an under there?
Oh yeah, Stuart Little. Ketantan, that's the Jewish version. He holds that it doesn't necessarily need to be that size. The Tosha says over here that this is Rav Huna's opinion, that Rav Huna holds that a tefach, 1 tefach is enough. Rav Huna before holds it. Sounds like what Tosha is saying is that we wouldn't hold like this. We would hold that this tefach isn't going to help. But for Rav Huna, this is his view that 1 tefach is considered kosher schach. Tasav aleimena asoi is I can't make the schach kosher by doing something, by kosherizing it. Here, I'm kosherizing it. He says, no, it's already kosher schach. The only thing is, you have to make walls. The tasav aleimena asoi isn't about the walls. That's would be a husband. And then how do we deal with everything else that we learned that contradicts this?
Kosher schach without a sukkah, that's viable. What good is it? And if you have to make walls after, then you're making walls after the schach, and then you just invalidated the schach.
Right.
So he has a nice opinion, but it doesn't hold water.
Right. So his opinion would have to be that his opinion would have to be that the kosher schach is independent of the walls. There's another din that I need to have walls, but the fact that the schach is kosher is already good. My sukkah has a problem because I need walls, and that I have to resolve, and that I could resolve by digging out the haystack and making it bigger. The sukkah needs to be kosher, but the schach that was there is fine already. Yeah, there's other ways of viewing this, but okay, let's go through it. But if there's a gap of a tefach, then it's going to be good. If it's b'meshach shiva, means 7 tefachim long. That's the minimal size of a sukkah. Tanya Nami Hachi was also taught in a brayso. If someone hollows out a haystack, harisa sukkah. Brayso says it is good. But our Mishnah says it's not good. Well, alav shmamina k'Rav Huna shmamina. What's our answer? Rav Huna gives us the answer. If there's a gap of a tefach underneath the haystack, then it's going to be kosher. If there's no gap, then it's not going to be kosher. We resolve a contradiction by saying the cases are different. Some did not put it like this. Some asked it as a contradiction. Ein a sukkah. The Mishnah says that if you hollow out a haystack to make it into a sukkah, it's not kosher. But Tanyari says sukkah, but we have a brisa that says that it is kosher. Amar Rav Huna comes along Rav Huna and says, not leishanu. Leishanu means it wasn't taught. It was only taught. Leishanu. Not like kasha, it's not a question. It's a different way of putting Rav Huna's words. First, we put it as a contradiction. Not a question. Kan b'shiyesham chalal tefach meshach shiva. Kan b'sheinsham chalal tefach meshach shiva. Depends if there was 7 tefachim gap underneath it. Is there a picture? A 1 tefach gap at the width of 7 tefach. I don't know the picture. This is the picture that we're talking about. The question is if there's a gap. We don't. It doesn't show us a gap. It's built on a pallet. Oh, that's great. That's a great picture. Look at this picture. It's not. It doesn't show you the gap, but it's really interesting that's what really people would do that. The hollowed out haystack. No, it's not kosher. Because it's got a pallet. It doesn't have a space underneath. If it had, yeah. According to Rav Huna, I don't know if that's because it's already a tent before you put on the top. It needs to be a tent. The problem is it's not considered that you put on schach. It's considered like it was there and you kosherized it later. And that's not allowed. It has to be tasi. You have to make the sukkah. You have to put the schach on and make it kosher initially, not kosherize it later.
But the guy who made the haystack, could he not have had in mind that this haystack would become?
Well, if you made it hollow at the beginning, put what's it called? Bale here, another pile it up, and then spread it out on the top. That's a kosher sukkah. We're talking about that it was all filled in. Then someone comes along and starts pulling out pieces. So that's not kosher because the schach was never put on kosher. You're making it kosher after. You're making it into schach after by pulling out the inside. Okay, we have a new Mishnah. Mishalshal defanis. Mishalshal means that you start weaving your wall. Let's say it's made out of reeds or poles or sticks or something. I had a sukkah like this. Milmaila lamata. From top to below. What I did was I got a, what's like schach mats. But you can get in little bamboo mats. They use them for shades, for blinds. So I hung them up along the wall of my sukkah, which was just a frame. And for sukkahs, I lowered it down. Because it's a blind, it's the shade. You pull it to the side and it drops down. That was it. And for the year, I left it up. It didn't last because it was outside. I thought I had like a great idea that I would lower it for sukkahs, but the weather just ate it up. So anyway, someone does this. Mishalshal defanis milmaila lamata. But when as he's lowering it down, it's getting lower. It could be he's building it also. It wasn't that lazy as I was doing it. So im gavayim min arch leisha tvachim psula. If it's raised above the ground 3 tvachim, it's puzzle. It's a problem. We said that goat, that geometry goat, that jumps through. If it can jump under the gap of a gap of 3 tvachim, that's no good. So 3 tvachim is the size that a goat could jump under. It's not good. See what we're doing is we're trying to make can we make halachic walls? Halachic walls are good as long as you're clearly not like violating it. Oh, but you make like a fictitious wall that things just like walk right through. So that's not a wall. It has to be that things don't get through. So if it's under 3 tvachim, then things don't get through. So that's love it. that would be attached to the floor. But here you're trying to make a wall. It could be 10 foot on the wall, which is really considered a wall. Problem is that it's supposed to go, it's a hanging wall. And you want to make it that, well, walls can travel up. Remember we said good asik, walls can travel upwards fictitiously. So it could also say good achas, the wall can travel down. It says no, it can't, because goats are walking through the whole time. So then, but okay.
Almost the bottom.
Oh, then once it gets close to the bottom, the goat can't get through, which is 3 tvachim, then it's kosher.
That's Stuart Little goat.
Yeah. Milmata lamaila. Let's say you did it the other way. You put a wall on the bottom and you started to go upwards. Even gavaya started tvachim kosher. Once you hit 10 tvachim, it's kosher. So you could make a sukkah on a balcony. There's nothing above you, a porch or whatever. And the balcony has walls 10 tvachim. That's good enough. You just put schach on top and you look outside over the,
Like the top fire escape.
Right. So, Rabbi Yossi Yomer, Shem shemalmata lamayla asar tvachim kach mamayla mata asar tvachim. If it worked building upwards, it works going downwards as well. Rabbi Yossi has this opinion. You want to remember this? The Yud of Yossi at the beginning of his name is also at the end of his name. Like, I don't know, that's a good sinner. But a 10 tvachim wall can go either from the bottom up or from the top down. Okay, b'maika miflagi. What is the machlekes? Mar savar mechitza tliya materas, mar savar mechitza tliya ena materas. What's a hanging wall? Is a hanging wall considered a real wall? So let's take a look. That's the machlekes. Tanan Hasan. We have a Mishnah over there in Eruvin. It says Barsha ben shtei chatzeres. Okay, the way it works.
Sukkahs on fire escapes.
Yeah, the thing with those sukkahs is that they added walls.
But they didn't have to, if you notice,
If
the
they-
escape going around. It's just,
Yeah.
they did it for private.
Okay, so what would happen is like this. If you have courtyards, if you want to go from one to another, if you want to carry from one to another, you need to make an Eruv. You can only make an Eruv if you have a doorway between them. If you don't have a doorway, then you can't make an Eruv because there's a wall. You can't make an Eruv if there's a wall. We had a whole discussion, but ladders both on each side, if you can still make an Eruv. But if there's no entrance way, you can't make an Eruv. Let's say there's a pit in between two courtyards. There's a wall that's going over the pit. So there's no way of making an Eruv. You want to take water out of the pit. The problem is when you take the water out, whose water are you taking? From the other courtyard, you're taking the water. So there's a problem there. You can't make an Eruv, and you can't take the water out. So what you can do is, well, first of all, there's a wall that's going right over it. So mechitza tluya, it's a hanging wall. Down in the pit, there's no wall. It doesn't go to the bottom of the pit, but there's a hanging wall there. The first opinions here in this Mishnah say that hanging wall doesn't help. It goes like this: Barsha ben shtei chatzeres, ein memala mena b'Shabbos, elam kenas la mechitza asar tvachim. It's not going to help, that wall. The koisel doesn't help. You have to go into the pit and make a partition in the pit of asar tvachim. You'd stretch a wall from one end of the pit to the other, straight across, so the courtyards are divided, that the well is divided between the courtyards. Now, skip the word bein malmayla. Bein malmata, bein b'teichagmei, whether it's down touching the water or whether it's up towards the top of above the water, because the water doesn't go all the way up to the top. It's a well, like the water goes down, is down in the well. You need a mechitza. Either it's down closer to the water or up closer to the lip. It doesn't matter. Shimon ben Gamliel says, Beishami says that you do it closer to the top. Beisil says you do it next to the water. Rabbi Yehuda. Rabbi Yehuda says, like the mechitza gedalim and akesel shebeneim. Why do you need a mechitza? You have a wall. The wall that's going above the over the pit, over the well, is a good wall. Your courtyard's already divided, and if your courtyard's divided, so it goes down, it travels down into the pit, and the pit is divided as well, and you can take water from your side. Amar Rabba Bar Bechana Amar Rabbi Yechanan. Rabba Bar Bechana says the name of Rabbi Yechanan. Rabbi Yehuda b'shitas Rabbi Yosi Amar. Rabbi Yehuda follows Rabbi Yosi's opinion. Rabbi Yosi in our Mishnah said a hanging wall is good. If you start a sukkah, remember you put the shades up on the sukkah and you lowered it down, even though there's a big gap, but as long as that wall is 10 tefachim, it's a hanging wall and it's kosher. Rabbi Yehuda also says that if I have a wall going across the courtyard over the well, it's a hanging wall and it's kosher. The Amar mechitza tluya materes. He says that a mechitza tluya, a hanging wall, is kosher. The Gemara says v'lohi. It's actually not so. I don't know what the Gemara means, saying that Rabbi Yechanan didn't say it, or our Gemara is not accepting what Rabbi Yechanan said. They actually disagree. Rabbi Yosi disagrees with Rabbi Yehuda. Both of them say that a hanging wall is good, but not in the cases that each one is referring to. Rabbi Yehuda wouldn't hold of Rabbi Yosi because Rabbi Yehuda, his case was an Erev Chatzeres. It's a Rosh Hashanah anyway. You're not supposed to carry from one Rosh Hashanah to another Rosh Hashanah. That's a decree. It looks like you're carrying, or it's similar to carrying into Rosh Hashanah, and people may end up doing that because if you can carry from one Rosh Hashanah to another, you may end up carrying to Rosh Hashanah. So the rabbis instituted Erevin. So you make fences and walls and food and come on. But this is all rabbinic. So for rabbinic Erevin, you can use a hanging wall. But sukkah, this is a deraisa. This it says in the Torah. You have to have a sukkah. This is Rabbi Yehuda would not accept Rabbi Yosi's wall, a hanging wall of a sukkah. He wouldn't accept it. But Rabbi Yosi Savalak Rabbi Yehuda, and Rabbi Yosi wouldn't accept Rabbi Yehuda either. Because Adkan, like Amar Rabbi Yosi Hachel of a sukkah the mitzvah say. You know what? Rabbi Yosi says that this is a mitzvah of sukkah. It's a mitzvah say. It's a positive command. You go ahead and you do the mitzvah. Aval Shabbos, this is skila, but Shabbos is very strict. There's a death penalty when it comes to Shabbos. Loi, he would never agree to Rabbi Yehuda's wall of Shabbos on Shabbos that you're allowed to take water out on Shabbos. It's a skila. Not really an issa skila, but the general category of Shabbos is much stricter than Sukkah. This detail happens to be more lenient, but the general category, Shabbos, you have to be more strict. Okay. After we've just said that Rabbi Yosi would not agree to Rabbi Yehuda, now the Gemara has a question based on information that we know about the city of Tzipori. Tzipori had a Rav. His name was Rabbi Yosi. And we have a story that comes from Tzipori where the Rav there paskined that it was acceptable to use a hanging mechitza on Shabbos. You say, so what was that story that we heard from Rabbi Yosi? We didn't hear it from this. We heard from Tzipori. According to who did they paskin? Tzipori. The Gemara tells us, well, there's different versions of this, but in that famous conversation between Rabbi Shimon Bar Yochai, Rabbi Yehuda Rabbi Loi, and Rabbi Yosi, which is Rabbi Yosi ben Chalafta, speaking about the Romans, if they were the Romans really good. Rabbi Yehuda said, yeah, the Romans are great. They built bridges and parks and plazas and everything. And Rabbi Yosi was quiet. And Rabbi Shimon said, oh no, they did it all for their own, just for their own selfish reasons. And anyway, the Romans heard about it because Yehuda ben Gerim was on the side, and somehow it went from him to someone else, whatever. But they said Rabbi Yehuda that spoke nicely about us, so he is the Reish HaMedaber. Rabbi Yosi that was silent will be exiled to Tzipori. And Rabbi Shimon Bar Yochai will be put to death. Right? These are all students of Rabbi Akiva. So yeah.
Where was that Gemara?
Shabbos 33. Yeah, I remember because Lag Baimer 33. Tzipari. Yeah. So apparently he allowed this. We're going to see what the story was. This is our question. But Rashi quotes it from a Gemara in Sanhedrin that says, you should go after a good Bezdin after Rabbi Yossi to Tzipari. Rabbi Yossi was in Tzipari. He was the Rav of it.
He
Okay.
just didn't finish the sentence. The Romans are good for nothing. He just didn't finish.
Right. Layalpi Rabbi Yossi, Layalpi Rabbi Yossi, LLP Rabbi Shmuel bar Rabbi Yossi. It wasn't really Rabbi Yossi. It was Rabbi Yossi's son, Rabbi Shmuel bar Rabbi Yossi. Yeah, apparently the Rabbistava was inherited by his son. Yeah, it's a big discussion in the Paiskim. If the rabbinate gets passed down automatically to the child. Okay, so what was the story? The Chiyasa Rav Dimi, when Rav Dimi came from Eretz Yisrael. Amar, he said, there was a problem with leaving the Sefer Torah in the shul. There were bandits that would come and they would ruin the Sefer Torah, so they would put it in someone's house. And then they would bring it on Shabbos, but they forgot they didn't bring it on Erev Shabbos. They didn't bring it on Erev Shabbos, and they also didn't have the Erev. The Erev wasn't set up. So what they needed to do was section off the courtyard, that there should only be one house that's open to that shul. Why do I need an Erev? Because there's more than one house there. There's only one house. You don't need an Erev. So what we needed to do is set up a divider to divide the courtyard and separate all the other houses. To keep one house next to the shul, and that's the whole courtyard. That's everything. Yeah, so these are all the houses. And so what they need is to set up the section of all of those, and then you don't need an Erev. So
made it like a private yard.
Make it like a private yard. Yeah. Now no one lives in the Beis HaKnesses, so the Beis HaKnesses doesn't need to contribute to the Erev of the house because there's no one living there. So it's just one house. One house is like in a backyard. You don't need an Erev. I mean, you don't need a food Erev or all of that. Okay, so so what did they do? They spread sheets over. It sounds like a line of a clothesline, and they put up the sheets along the clothesline, and it was good
on Shabbos.
On Shabbos, and then they read the Sefer Torah in the shul. It says Parsus al Kadaitach. Did they spread it on Shabbos? How did they get it there on Shabbos? They couldn't carry it. If you couldn't carry the Sefer Torah, you can't carry the sheets. They didn't spread it on Shabbos. It was there already, and they found it that it was spread. They looked along. They saw, hey, it's very nice. They hung up the sheets, the tablecloths. It works perfectly. We can carry. Yeah. Rashi avoids another pshat over here. There's another pshat that Tosfos seems to follow. That the issue is not the carrying of the sheets. Rashi says the issue is the carrying of the sheets. It said, how could they have carried it? Tosfos, the issue was the making a machitza. Making an oil. You're not allowed to set up a tent on Shabbos. So there's two parts to a tent. There's the roof and the sides. Rashi is not bothered by the sides of a tent. It's a temporary tent and it's only a side. Tosfos over here is bothered by that. Okay, Amar Rav Chisda, have a new piece. Amar Avimi, Rav Chisda says name of Avimi, Machtzela Sarba Mashu Materis B'Sukkah. The sukkah needs to be 10 tvachim tall. I can get away with a board with a mat of 4 tvachim. Plus, 4 tvachim and a bit. Materis Mishum Doifen. But Materis Mishum Doifen. Hechi Avid, how do you do it? You put it smack in the middle, 3 tvachim on top, 3 tvachim below, 4 in the middle. It's 6 plus 4 would be 10. But each one is not 100% 3 tvachim. It's 2.9. 2.9 on the top, 2.9 on the bottom. So, pachas mishleish lamata, pachas mishleish lamayla, v'chol pachas mishleish kalavadami. So I have lavud. Lavud means that it becomes attached. It becomes solid. So I have a wall of 10 tvachim with only using 4 tvachim of material. Says pshita. That's obvious. This is not according to code. Pshita, obvious. It says, we asked, what are you telling me? The din of lavud? I know lavud. He says, no, I didn't think that you can do lavud twice. You know, how many sides of the salami can you cut off? You know, you don't have it. It's not that it doesn't go that way. It doesn't go that way. He says, no, it's good. It's fine. It works on both ways. Okay, Meisvei. Here's the question. It says, you want to get away with a little bit? You need a board of mat of 7 tvachim, not 4 tvachim. Why do you say before 4? It says, Kitani b'sukkah gedola. You know why? Because we're dealing with the sukkah gedola. You see, a sukkah katana would give me 3 tvachim till the roof, 3 tvachim till the floor. It's exactly 10 tvachim. I can get away with 4 tvachim, and that would make it. But let's say it was a very tall sukkah, not 20 amas, but a tall sukkah. I can't do lavud twice, because if I'm close to the floor, then I'm far from the roof. But it's like a blanket that's too short. It either covers your feet or you.
Exactly 10.
If it's exactly 10, I can get away with 4 tvachim. But here, I don't have lavud on the other side, so I need 7 tvachim. Micah Mashmalan, so what's the chiddush? You told me the chiddush before, so you say lavud twice. What's the chiddush over here? The Mishal Salim Defanis Milmaila Lamata Kirabiesi. You know what we mean? The chiddush over here is that you're putting it up 3 tvachim from the top. Even though there's a big gap on the bottom, the chiddush is that we're passing like Rabbi Yossi. That a hanging wall is accepted. Amar Rabami. Rabami says, "Passer ba'amashu mata b'sukkah mishum daifen." A wall of 4 tvachim works. Now we're working the other way. We're not working a hanging wall or something. We're working sideways. It's a full 10 tvachim, but it only needs to be 4 tvachim. How big does the sukkah need to be? So, my kamashlan, what's the chiddush? What is the chiddush? Hakamashlan shir meshach sukkah ktana shiva. We never mentioned this before. It took us until page 16 of sukkah to tell me how big a sukkah needs to be. 7 tvachim. We always gave a measurement: the head, the body, and the table. Now we know that it's 7 tvachim. Okay. The length of the sukkah. The height is 10 tvachim. Have a good day, everyone.